I'm Lindsay Mitchell, 28 years old, and last month I watched my beloved grandfather Harold take his final breath. He raised me when no one else would, leaving me his cherished home in his will. 2 days after his funeral, I returned to find the locks changed and my mother Brenda inside. When I showed her the will, she laughed in my face. "You have nothing here," she sneered, slamming the door. I stood there homeless, shaking with rage and grief. Before I continue this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that subscribe button and stick around to see how I took back what was rightfully mine from the woman who abandoned me twice. My relationship with my grandfather Harold was the closest thing to a parent-child bond I'd ever experienced. When I was 8, my parents went through a bitter divorce that shattered our family. My father moved across the country for work, while my mother, Brenda, seemed to view her newfound freedom as an opportunity to reinvent herself without the burden of a child. Within months, she met Frank, a charismatic businessman who didn't particularly like children. One evening, after yet another argument about her increasing absences, she packed a suitcase and dropped me off at my grandfather's modest 2-bedroom house in the suburbs of Portland. Just for a few weeks, she promised, kissing my forehead. Those weeks turned into months and eventually years. Grandpa Harold never complained once. He was a retired high school English teacher with a passion for woodworking and gardening. His home became my sanctuary. The backyard maple tree held a swing he built by hand. My bedroom walls, once bare, gradually filled with photographs, achievement certificates, and memories. "Family isn't always blood, Linz," he would say, helping me with homework at the kitchen table. "Family is who shows up, who stays, who puts in the work." Throughout high school and college, I watched my mother's sporadic appearances decrease further. She'd send birthday cards with cash, occasionally call during holidays, but the woman who gave birth to me had effectively chosen a new life with Frank. They traveled extensively, started businesses together, and settled 3 hours away in Seattle. Meanwhile, Grandpa Harold attended every school play, drove me to soccer practice, and taught me to change a tire and balance a checkbook. When I graduated from college, he sat in the front row, tears streaming down his weathered face. I got a job at a marketing firm in Portland and rented a small apartment downtown, but visited him every weekend. When he was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer 2 years ago, there was no question about what would happen next. I moved back home to care for him. Those final months were precious and painful. We watched old westerns together, I read his favorite poetry aloud, and we had conversations that stretched late into the night. During one such evening, as I adjusted his pillows, he brought up the house. "Lindsay, I want you to know that this place will be yours when I'm gone," he said, his voice weak but determined. "I've already arranged everything with Benjamin, my attorney. This house gave you stability once. I wanted to do that for you again." I tried to shush him, not wanting to discuss a future without him, but he insisted. "Your mother will likely make a fuss," he continued. "She's always felt entitled to things she didn't earn. But I've made my wishes clear legally. This home belongs to you." When he passed away on a rainy Tuesday morning, I was holding his hand. The grief was overwhelming, like drowning on dry land. I could barely function during the funeral arrangements, grateful that Grandpa had pre-planned most details. The reading of the will happened 1 week after the funeral. Benjamin Reynolds, Grandpa's longtime attorney and friend, confirmed what he had told me. The house, along with a modest life insurance policy and his personal possessions, were left to me. My mother sat across the room, her face tightening as Benjamin read the terms. "There must be some mistake," she interrupted. "I'm his only child." "There's no mistake, Mrs. Wallace," Benjamin replied calmly. Harold was very specific about his wishes. After the reading, my mother cornered me in the hallway, Frank hovering behind her like a shadow. "You manipulated him when he was sick and vulnerable," she hissed. "This isn't over." I was too exhausted by grief to engage. My friend Rachel suggested I stay with her for a few days to process everything before officially moving back into Grandpa's house. It seemed like a good idea to have some emotional support rather than facing those empty rooms alone immediately. "Are you sure your mom won't try anything?" Rachel asked as we drove away from the attorney's office. "What could she do?" I replied, "The will is clear. Grandpa made his intentions known to everyone, including his attorney." How terribly naive I was. How unprepared for the lengths to which a bitter, entitled woman would go. I spent 3 days with Rachel, sorting through my feelings and making plans for the house. I thought about which rooms I might renovate, how I'd preserve Grandpa's garden, whether I should keep his workshop intact. These thoughts became a lifeline through grief, a future to move toward. I had no idea that across town, my mother was already setting her plan in motion. On Friday morning, I drove to what was now legally my house, carrying coffee and fresh bagels. I planned to start cleaning out the refrigerator and sorting through some of Grandpa's clothes to donate. When I pulled into the driveway, something felt immediately wrong. The curtains in the living room had been changed from Grandpa's faded blue ones to cream-colored panels I'd never seen before. With growing unease, I walked up the familiar stone path and inserted my key into the front door. It didn't work. I tried again, jiggling the handle, but the key wouldn't turn. That's when I noticed the new deadbolt installed above the original lock. I knocked, first politely, then more forcefully as panic rose in my chest. Finally, the door swung open. And there stood my mother, dressed as if for a business meeting. "Lindsay," she said flatly. "What are you doing here?" "What am I doing here?" I repeated, stunned. "This is my house. Grandpa left it to me. What are you doing here, and why are the locks changed?" She smiled thinly and stepped aside, revealing the interior. The living room had been partially emptied, with Grandpa's favorite recliner notably missing. Boxes were stacked against one wall. "Your grandfather and I had an understanding," she said smoothly. "This house has been in our family for generations. He always intended for it to stay with his daughter." Frank appeared behind her, placing a possessive hand on her shoulder. "We've already spoken with our attorney. Harold wasn't in his right mind when he made that will, with all the medications he was taking." I stood there speechless for a moment before finding my voice. "That's not true. He was completely lucid. He told me multiple times the house would go to me. It's in his will." I fumbled in my purse for the copy of the will Benjamin had given me, thrusting it toward them. My mother barely glanced at it. "Papers can be changed," she said dismissively. "What matters is what he told me personally. I'm his daughter. You're just his grandchild." "I took care of him for 2 years while he was dying," I said, my voice cracking. "Where were you?" "In Europe? On another cruise?" "You barely called him." Frank stepped forward, his imposing frame filling the doorway. "I think you should leave now, Lindsay. This is a family matter that will be settled legally." "I am family," I shouted, tears stinging my eyes. "And this house is legally mine." "You have nothing here," my mother said coldly, moving to close the door. "We'll have our attorneys contact you." The door slammed in my face. I stood there in disbelief, the bag of now-cold bagels still clutched in my hand. Through the window, I could see them continuing to pack up my grandfather's belongings as if I weren't even there. I retreated to my car and immediately called Benjamin Reynolds. His secretary said he was in court, but promised he would call back as soon as possible. Next, I called Rachel, barely able to form coherent sentences through my tears. "They've taken over the house," I sobbed. "They changed the locks. They're packing up his things." Rachel immediately offered to come get me, but I needed answers first. I drove to the local police station, naively hoping they could help. The officer I spoke with was sympathetic but explained that this was a civil matter, not criminal. "Even though I have the will showing I own the house?" I asked desperately. "Unfortunately, yes," he confirmed. "You'll need to go through the courts to enforce the will and evict them if they're unlawfully occupying your property." By the time Benjamin called me back, I was sitting in a coffee shop parking lot, feeling homeless and betrayed. He was outraged when I explained what had happened. "This is absolutely unacceptable," he said firmly. "The will is crystal clear, and I can personally attest that your grandfather was of sound mind when he made his decisions. Your mother has no legal ground to stand on. So what do?" I asked, feeling completely lost. "We'll need to file for an emergency eviction," he explained. "But I have to warn you, Lindsay, these things can take time. The courts are backed up, and your mother seems prepared to fight dirty." The weight of what was happening crashed down on me. Not only had I lost my grandfather, but now I was facing a legal battle with my own mother over the home where I grew up. The home that was rightfully mine. "How much will this cost?" I asked, suddenly realizing the financial implications. There was a slight pause. "It won't be inexpensive," Benjamin admitted. "But Harold was my friend for 40 years. I'll work with you on the payments." That night, I stayed at Rachel's apartment again, this time not by choice but necessity. As I lay on her pull-out couch, I scrolled through photos on my phone, pictures of me and Grandpa in the garden he loved, standing proudly beside the bookshelves we built together, celebrating my college graduation on the front porch. Each image was a reminder of what had been stolen from me. "I can't believe she would do this," Rachel said, handing me a cup of tea. "I mean, I know your relationship was strained, but this is a whole new level." "I always thought deep down she cared, at least a little," I whispered. "But now I realize she only cares about herself. She abandoned me once when I was a child, and now she's doing it again." I fell into an uneasy sleep that night, torn between crushing grief and building anger. The mother who had walked out of my life when I needed her most was now trying to take the only real home I'd ever known. The fight ahead seemed impossible. But I knew one thing for certain: I would not let her erase my grandfather's final wish. The next morning, I drove past the house on my way to work, a detour I couldn't help making. What I saw made my stomach drop. My mother and Frank were loading Grandpa's antique desk, the one where he wrote letters and graded papers for decades, into a rented moving truck. They were emptying the house of its valuables. Without thinking, I pulled into the driveway, blocking the truck. I jumped out of my car, shaking with fury. "What do you think you're doing?" I demanded. "Those aren't your things to take." My mother barely looked up from her clipboard. "Lindsay, we've been through this. Go to work. This doesn't concern you." "That desk belonged to Grandpa's father," I said, my voice rising. "He specifically wanted me to have it. It's listed in the will." Frank stepped toward me menacingly. "Move your car. Now." I pulled out my phone. "I'm calling the police. This is theft." My mother's expression changed from dismissive to angry. "Go ahead. Call them." To my shock, she pulled out her own phone and dialed before I could. "Yes, hello. There's a woman trespassing on our property and threatening us. We need assistance immediately." She gave the address, then smiled coldly at me. "They're on their way." I stood frozen, unable to comprehend that she was calling the police on me, her own daughter, at the house that legally belonged to me. 20 minutes later, I was explaining my situation to 2 officers while fighting back tears of frustration. I showed them the will on my phone, but just like the officer at the station had said, they explained it was a civil matter. "Ma'am, we understand your frustration, but we can't determine property ownership on site," one officer explained gently. "If there's a dispute about the will and property ownership, that needs to be resolved in court." "But they're taking things that belong to me," I protested. "Without a court order specifying what items belong to whom, we can't stop them from moving property," the other officer said. The humiliation of standing in my own driveway, being treated like an intruder while my mother smugly watched, was almost unbearable. I had no choice but to move my car and leave, watching in my rearview mirror as they continued loading my grandfather's precious belongings into the truck. At work, I could barely focus. During my lunch break, I called Benjamin again to update him on what was happening. They're emptying the house of valuables, I said, my voice breaking. By the time we get to court, there will be nothing left. This complicates things, Benjamin admitted. But it also strengthens our case. They're clearly acting in bad faith. I've drafted the emergency eviction paperwork. But I've also learned your mother has retained Victor Sullivan as her attorney. My heart sank. Victor Sullivan was notorious in Portland legal circles, an aggressive, borderline unethical lawyer who specialized in property disputes and wasn't above using dirty tactics. What does that mean for us? I asked. It means they're preparing for a fight, Benjamin said grimly. Sullivan will try to drag this out, challenge the will, possibly even claim your grandfather was unduly influenced by you during his illness. The suggestion that I had somehow manipulated my dying grandfather made me physically ill. That's disgusting. I was taking care of him. I know that, Lindsay. And we'll make sure the court knows it too. But I need to prepare you. This could get ugly and expensive. After hanging up, I sat in my car and did something I'd been avoiding. I calculated my finances. Between my modest marketing salary, rent for my apartment, student loans, and now unexpected legal fees, I was looking at a financial disaster. I had some savings, but nowhere near enough for a prolonged legal battle. That night, I couldn't sleep. Around 2 a.m, I created a spreadsheet of all my expenses, trying to figure out where I could cut costs. I considered taking a second job, selling my car, anything to fund this fight. The injustice of it all kept hitting me in waves. Not only had I lost my grandfather and my home, but now I was going into debt, trying to reclaim what was rightfully mine. The next day, Rachel connected me with her cousin who worked in real estate law. She couldn't represent me, but over coffee, she offered some advice and resources. Document everything, she emphasized. Take photos of the house, make lists of what was inside, gather any witnesses who heard your grandfather express his wishes. Witnesses, I repeated, suddenly remembering something important. Grandpa's neighbors, the Hendersons. They've lived next door for 20 years. They were there when he told me the house would be mine. This small realization felt like the first positive development in days. I immediately drove to the Hendersons' house after work. Martha Henderson answered the door, her face lighting up when she saw me, then falling as she registered my expression. "Oh, Lindsay," she said, pulling me into a hug. "We've been so worried. We've seen your mother and that husband of hers coming and going. Arthur tried to talk to them yesterday and got quite a rude response." Inside their cozy living room, the Hendersons confirmed they would be willing to provide statements about my grandfather's intentions. They had heard him mention multiple times that the house would go to me. "He was so proud of you," dear Martha said, squeezing my hand. "The way you cared for him those last months. I've never seen such devotion." This validation from people who had witnessed our relationship brought fresh tears to my eyes. As I was leaving, Arthur mentioned something that made my blood run cold. "They've put up a for sale sign in the yard this morning," he said. "Seems they're not wasting any time." I drove around the block to confirm. And there it was, a real estate sign bearing the name of a high-end agency. My mother wasn't just trying to claim the house, she was planning to sell it out from under me. That night, I made a difficult decision and posted about my situation on social media, careful to stick to the facts without venturing into potential defamation. I explained that my grandfather had left me his house, but my estranged mother had moved in, changed the locks, and was now attempting to sell the property against my grandfather's explicit wishes. The post quickly generated supportive comments, but also brought unexpected consequences. A distant cousin messaged me privately to say my mother had been telling family members that I had manipulated my grandfather while he was on heavy medications, convincing him to change his will to spite her. "No one who knows you believes it," my cousin assured me. "But she's really pushing this narrative." The realization that my mother was actively trying to damage my reputation within our extended family felt like another betrayal. It was becoming clear that this wasn't just about the house. She seemed determined to punish me for having the relationship with Grandpa that she had never bothered to maintain. As I scrolled through local real estate listings that night, my heart stopped when I found it, Grandpa's house, my house, listed for $590,000. The listing included professional photos taken that very day, showcasing rooms that had been hastily staged, with most of Grandpa's personal touches already removed. The description read, "Charming family home with great bones, ready for your personal touch. Motivated sellers, priced to move quickly." They weren't just selling my inheritance. They were erasing any trace that my grandfather had ever lived there. And they were rushing to close a deal before I could stop them. The next day, during my lunch break, I drove by the house again, a painful ritual I couldn't seem to break. The for sale sign now had a virtual tour available rider attached to it. I parked across the street, fighting the urge to march up to the door and demand entrance to my own home. Instead, I called the real estate agency listed on the sign, pretending to be an interested buyer. The agent was enthusiastic, explaining that the sellers were motivated and already reviewing offers. When I asked about the property history and ownership, she hesitated slightly before saying the house had been in the same family for years and was now being sold as part of an estate settlement. A partial truth that obscured the real story. Back at work, I could barely concentrate. During an afternoon meeting, my boss noticed my distraction and pulled me aside afterward. "Lindsay, is everything okay? You haven't been yourself lately." I hesitated, then decided honesty was the best approach. I gave her a condensed version of what was happening. Her face grew increasingly concerned as I spoke. "That's terrible. Why didn't you say something sooner? Take the rest of the day off. Family comes first, or in this case, fighting family comes first." Grateful for her understanding, I used the unexpected free time to visit a different attorney, Diana Fairchild, who specialized in real estate law. Benjamin was handling the will contest, but I needed specific expertise on stopping the sale. Diana's office was smaller than Benjamin's, but she radiated competence and focus. After reviewing my documents and listening to my story, she leaned forward, hands clasped on her desk. "They're moving quickly because they know they're on shaky legal ground," she explained. "We need to act faster. Have you heard of a lease pendens?" I shook my head. It's Latin for suit pending. It's a formal notice filed with the county recorder's office that effectively clouds the title of the property. It alerts potential buyers that there's ongoing litigation affecting the property rights. For the first time in days, I felt a flicker of hope. So it would stop the sale? Any legitimate buyer would back out immediately once their title search reveals a lease pendens. No bank will finance a purchase with clouded title. She smiled slightly. It's basically kryptonite to a fraudulent sale. I felt the knot in my chest loosen slightly. How quickly can we file it? I can have the paperwork ready tomorrow. We'll need to file it with the county recorder and notify all parties, including the real estate agency. She paused. However, this is just one part of the strategy. We also need to gather more evidence for the underlying case. She advised me to collect any documents, emails, texts, or cards from my grandfather that might demonstrate our relationship and his intentions. I also needed to document everything I knew about the house's contents, especially items of particular value. That evening, I immersed myself in this task, creating detailed lists and finding old photographs that showed the interior of the house. I discovered several birthday cards from Grandpa that referenced the house as my future home. In one from my 25th birthday, he had written, "Looking forward to the day you make this old house shine with your own special touch. It will be your turn to create memories here." I photographed each item carefully, building a digital archive of evidence. The next day, I met Diana at the county recorder's office to file the lease pendens. As we waited for the paperwork to be processed, I noticed my hands were shaking. "What if this doesn't work?" I asked quietly. What if they sell it before we can stop them? Diana placed a steady hand on my shoulder. One step at a time. Lindsay, this is a strong first move. After filing, we sent formal notifications to my mother, Victor Sullivan, and the real estate agency handling the listing. Diana advised me to monitor the listing closely for any changes. That night, while searching through my email for any additional evidence, I found something I had completely forgotten, a folder of scanned documents Grandpa had sent me 2 years ago for safekeeping. Among tax returns and insurance policies was a journal he had kept during his final year, with instructions that I should read it after he was gone. With trembling fingers, I opened the document and began reading. The journal contained his thoughts about his illness, reflections on his life, and, importantly, multiple entries about his concerns regarding my mother's sudden renewed interest in him after his diagnosis. Brenda visited today. First time in 3 years, one entry read. Asked pointed questions about my will and financial arrangements. Expressed surprise that the house wasn't already in her name. I didn't tell her I've decided to leave it to Lindsay. She would only cause problems before my time comes. Lindsay has been my true family. This house should go to someone who loves it, who has memories in every room, not someone looking to cash in. These private thoughts were devastating and vindicating all at once. I forwarded the entire document to both Benjamin and Diana, highlighting the most relevant passages. This was the evidence we needed, my grandfather's own words confirming his intentions and concerns. The next morning, I received an urgent call from Diana. The listing for the house has been updated, she said. It now says pending sale with a closing date set for next week. They found a buyer and are trying to rush the closing. My heart sank. But what about the lease pendants? Wouldn't that stop everything? Normally, yes. But if they're not disclosing it to the buyers, or if they found a cash buyer who's skipping some of the normal due diligence. She paused. We need to take more aggressive action. I'm going to contact the escrow company directly and the buyer's agent if we can identify them. This development filled me with renewed panic. The idea that my mother might succeed in selling my house out from under me, despite our legal actions, was unbearable. Diana assured me she would handle the notifications while I focused on gathering any remaining evidence for our case. Later that day, while sorting through more of Grandpa's digital files, I discovered something unexpected, a video recording. It was from last Christmas, when he was still relatively strong despite his illness. In it, he was sitting in his favorite chair. The decorated tree visible in the background, addressing the camera directly. Lindsay, he began, his voice warm but tired. I'm not sure if you'll ever watch this. But I wanted to leave something more personal than legal documents. This house has been in our family for 3 generations. My father passed it to me. And now I'm passing it to you, the person who brought it back to life when you came to live with me all those years ago. He went on to speak about his hopes for the house's future, mentioning specific features he hoped I would preserve and others he thought I might want to update. It was clear evidence that his decision to leave me the house was not a spontaneous one, but something he had considered deeply. I immediately forwarded the video to both attorneys, my hands shaking with emotion. This wasn't just evidence for our case. It was a precious final gift from my grandfather that I hadn't known existed. Armed with this new evidence, we scheduled an emergency strategy meeting for the following day. It was time to bring everything together and take decisive action before my inheritance slipped away completely. The morning of our strategy meeting, I received a text from Martha Henderson. There are people measuring the front yard. They look like buyers. I forwarded the message to Diana, who called me immediately. This is moving too quickly, she said, her voice tense. The lease pendants should have stopped this. Either they're ignoring it or something else is happening. I'm filing for an emergency injunction today. Benjamin joined our conference call. His normally measured tone replaced with urgency. I've discovered something concerning, he said. The buyers appear to be associates of Frank's from his investment group. I suspect they may be helping facilitate a quick sale with plans to flip the property or split profits later. They're using straw buyers, Diana confirmed. It's unethical and potentially fraudulent, but difficult to prove without more evidence. We formulated a multi-pronged approach. Benjamin would file for the emergency injunction while Diana contacted the escrow company directly. I would gather any final evidence we needed from the Hendersons and other neighbors. As I prepared to leave work early for these tasks, I received a barrage of angry text messages from my mother. What do you think you're doing with these legal games? You're only hurting yourself. This will cost you more than you can afford. The house is being sold. Nothing you can do will stop it. The last message chilled me. You've made an enemy of the wrong person. I'm your mother. I know all your weaknesses. I showed the messages to Diana, who advised me to save them but not respond. This is good for us, she explained. She's acknowledging she knows about your claim while threatening you. Judges don't look kindly on this kind of behavior. The next morning, Diana called with news. The escrow company has been notified of the lease pendants and legal issues. They're putting a hold on the transaction, pending legal clarification. This small victory gave me courage. The emergency hearing for the injunction was scheduled for the following Monday, but there was still the weekend to get through. I worried about what my mother might do when she learned the sale was delayed. Saturday morning, I drove to the house with Benjamin. We had decided it was time to formally serve my mother with the court documents in person. A sheriff's deputy accompanied us, as Benjamin had requested official service of process. As we pulled up, I saw the moving truck was back in the driveway. They were continuing to empty the house despite our legal actions. The deputy approached first, knocking firmly on the door. After a long moment, Frank answered, his expression darkening when he saw me standing behind the officer. Mr. and Mrs. Wallace, I'm here to serve you with legal documents, the deputy stated formally. Frank tried to object, but the deputy calmly explained that refusing service would only complicate matters. Reluctantly, he accepted the paperwork. My mother appeared in the doorway, her face flushed with anger. You're making a spectacle in front of the neighbors, she hissed. You left me no choice, I replied, finding strength I didn't know I had. You're trying to steal my home and erase Grandpa's wishes. This house should have been mine decades ago, she snapped. My father promised it to me long before you were born. Then why did he legally leave it to me? I challenged. Why did he write in his journal that you only showed interest after his diagnosis? Her expression faltered for a moment. What journal? Grandpa kept records of everything, I said, including your sudden interest in his assets after years of absence. We have it all, Mom. The court will see exactly what you're doing. Frank stepped forward, his intimidating presence no longer affecting me. Your grandfather was confused and manipulated. We have witnesses. Paid witnesses. Benjamin interjected smoothly. The court will be very interested in examining their credibility compared to the neighbors who saw Lindsay care for her grandfather daily for 2 years. My mother's composure cracked. You have no idea what I've been through. This house was supposed to be my security, my inheritance. That you abandoned when you abandoned me, I said quietly. You can't abandon something for 20 years and then claim it when it's convenient. As we spoke, a car pulled into the driveway, a couple I didn't recognize, accompanied by the real estate agent. The potential buyers had arrived for another viewing, walking into the middle of our confrontation. The real estate agent looked alarmed, quickly trying to usher her clients back toward their car. Perhaps we should reschedule. No need, Benjamin called out. These people should know exactly what they're walking into. He approached them directly, introducing himself as my attorney. I feel professionally obligated to inform you that this property is subject to active litigation. The sellers do not have clear title to transfer, and any sale would be immediately challenged in court. The couple exchanged concerned glances while the agent tried to interject. Benjamin handed them his card along with a copy of the lease pendants filing. I suggest you perform your due diligence very carefully, he advised them. The legal owner of this property is standing right here, and she has no intention of honoring any fraudulent sale. My mother rushed forward. Don't listen to them. They're just trying to delay the inevitable. We have our own attorney who assures us. But the damage was done. The couple was already retreating to their car, the man shaking his head firmly at the agent. This was clearly not the simple transaction they had been promised. As they drove away, my mother turned on me with fury. You've ruined everything. Do you have any idea what you've done? For the first time, I saw something beyond anger in her eyes: panic. Real, genuine panic. Mom, I said, suddenly understanding. What's really going on here? Why the rush to sell? Frank tried to pull her away, but she shook him off. 20 years of resentment seemed to pour out of her at once. Frank's business is underwater, she blurted, ignoring his attempts to silence her. We needed the money from this sale to cover debts. We were going to lose everything. So you decided to steal my inheritance instead? I asked incredulously. It should have been mine to begin with, she shouted. My father chose you over me, his own daughter. The raw pain in her voice momentarily caught me off guard. Despite everything, I glimpsed the wounded person beneath the cruelty, a woman who had never felt she measured up to her father's expectations, who had run away from family responsibilities and now found herself desperate. That doesn't make what you're doing right, I said more gently. Grandpa made his choice based on the relationships he valued. You chose not to be part of his life, or mine. Our confrontation was interrupted by the ringing of Benjamin's phone. After a brief conversation, he turned to me with a smile. That was the buyer's agent, he said. They're formally withdrawing their offer. It seems our friends here neglected to disclose the lease pendens and pending litigation. My mother collapsed onto the front steps, her head in her hands. Frank paced the yard, making angry phone calls. The house wasn't sold yet, but the battle was far from over. As we prepared to leave, my mother looked up at me, her makeup streaked with tears. You think you've won. But Victor will destroy you in court. We still have options. Benjamin and I returned to his car. As we drove away, he commented, their panic suggests they're in a much worse financial position than they've let on. That could work in our favor. Less than an hour later, as I was recounting the confrontation to Rachel over coffee, my phone rang with an unknown number. It was Victor Sullivan, my mother's attorney. Miss Mitchell, he began, his tone surprisingly conciliatory. In light of recent developments, my clients would like to discuss a potential resolution before Monday's hearing. I looked at Benjamin, who had anticipated this call and was sitting across from me. He nodded encouragingly. I'm listening, I said, putting the call on speaker. Mrs. Wallace is prepared to vacate the property voluntarily and acknowledge your ownership rights, Sullivan continued, in exchange for certain concessions regarding personal property and a reasonable timeline. What changed? I asked directly. There was a pause. Let's just say my clients have reassessed their position. The evidence you've presented is compelling. After hanging up, Benjamin explained what had happened. The buyers backing out was the first blow. Then the escrow company probably informed them they could be liable for fraud for trying to sell property with clouded title. Finally, our evidence, particularly your grandfather's journal and video, made Sullivan realize they had no case. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt the sweet taste of victory. The house wasn't back in my possession yet, but the tide had definitively turned. Monday morning's emergency hearing was brief but decisive. Judge Eleanor Winters listened to presentations from both attorneys, reviewed our evidence, and made her ruling with little hesitation. Based on the clear language of Harold Mitchell's will and the substantial evidence of his intentions, I am granting the injunction against any sale or transfer of the property, she declared. Furthermore, I am ordering Mrs. Wallace and any persons residing with her to vacate the premises within 72 hours. My mother sat rigidly beside Victor Sullivan, her expression unreadable. Frank was conspicuously absent. As we left the courtroom, Sullivan approached us with a request for a brief conference. In a small meeting room, he outlined their terms for compliance. "My clients will vacate as ordered," he stated formally. They request 48 hours to remove their personal belongings and any items they brought to the property. Benjamin countered. "Given the unauthorized removal of property that has already occurred, we'll need a detailed inventory of what they're taking. Nothing that belonged to Harold Mitchell can leave without MS." Mitchell's explicit approval. After some negotiation, we agreed that I would be present with a sheriff's deputy to oversee the removal of their possessions. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it would prevent further theft of my grandfather's belongings. The next afternoon, I arrived at the house accompanied by the deputy, Rachel, and Benjamin. My mother and Frank were already loading their personal items into a small U-Haul. The atmosphere was tense but controlled under the watchful eye of law enforcement. Stepping inside my grandfather's house, my house, for the first time since this ordeal began was overwhelming. The familiar spaces had been partially emptied, with rectangular clean spots on the walls where pictures had hung for decades. Grandpa's bookshelves stood bare, his collection of classic literature and history books nowhere to be seen. "Where are all his books?" I asked my mother as she carried out a designer lamp I'd never seen before. She shrugged. "We donated some things. Sold others." The casual dismissal of my grandfather's treasured possessions sent a wave of anger through me. "You had no right to dispose of his things. Those weren't yours to sell. Sue me." She replied coldly. "You've already taken everything else." Despite her attitude, I maintained my composure, methodically documenting the condition of the house and noting missing items. The deputy's presence prevented any major confrontations, though the tension remained palpable. As they prepared to leave with their final load, I noticed my mother lingering in Grandpa's study. Now empty except for the heavy oak desk they hadn't managed to remove. She ran her hand over its worn surface, a faraway look in her eyes. "He used to help me with homework at this desk," she said quietly, seemingly forgetting I was there. "Before I became such a disappointment to him." For a moment, I glimpsed the complicated relationship she'd had with her father, one I would never fully understand. But that moment of vulnerability quickly passed as Frank called impatiently from outside. With a final glance around, she walked out the front door without saying goodbye. The deputy confirmed they had left nothing behind that wasn't agreed upon, then departed as well. Just like that, I was alone in my grandfather's house, my house, with Rachel and Benjamin. "We should change the locks immediately," Benjamin advised. "I have a locksmith on standby." While waiting for the locksmith, I wandered through the rooms, assessing the damage and theft. The house felt hollow, stripped of many items that had given it character and warmth. Grandpa's antique wall clock was gone, as was his collection of hand-carved birds. The custom bookshelves stood empty, dust outlines showing where volumes had stood for years. "They took so much," I said to Rachel, fighting back tears. "But they couldn't take the house," she reminded me, squeezing my shoulder. "And that's what mattered most to your grandfather." The locksmith arrived and quickly changed all the exterior locks, providing me with new keys. After Benjamin and Rachel left, I stood alone in the living room, both victorious and devastated. I had won the battle for my inheritance, but at a steep cost, both financially and emotionally. That evening, as I was making a list of missing items for potential legal action, I received a text from an unknown number. "Check your mother's apartment. Unit 307 at the Parkview on Burnside. Code 4829. It was unsigned, but I suspected it came from Frank. Perhaps his conscience had finally caught up with him, or more likely, their relationship was fracturing under financial pressure. The next morning, I drove to the address, debating whether to use the information. It felt invasive, yet those were my grandfather's possessions, my inheritance they had taken. After sitting in the parking lot for 20 minutes, I made my decision and entered the building. Using the code, I accessed the hallway and found Unit 307. I knocked firmly, prepared to face my mother again. To my surprise, an elderly woman answered. "I'm looking for Brenda Wallace," I said, confused. "Oh, they moved out yesterday," she replied. "I'm the property manager. Are you a friend?" "I'm her daughter," I admitted. She took some family heirlooms that belonged to me. I was hoping to recover them. The woman's expression softened. "They left in quite a hurry. There's a storage unit in the basement they were using. They didn't empty it completely. Would you like to take a look? I can't officially give you access, but if you identify something as yours." The storage unit contained several boxes labeled Harold stuff. Inside, I found Grandpa's beloved books, photo albums, and some smaller furniture pieces. The property manager. After seeing my matching last name on my ID and hearing my story, allowed me to take what I could prove was family property. "Usually I wouldn't do this," she confided. But they left owing 2 months' rent. Mr. Wallace's checks bounced, and they disappeared overnight. This revelation confirmed what I had suspected. Their financial situation was dire, motivating the desperate attempt to sell my house. While it didn't excuse their actions, it helped me understand the panicked intensity behind their scheme. That evening, I sat in my living room, surrounded by recovered books and photo albums. I opened one album to find pictures of my mother as a young woman, standing proudly beside a much younger Harold. They were smiling, arms around each other, looking like a normal, happy father and daughter. Something about that image broke through my anger, allowing me to feel a complex wave of emotions: sadness for the relationship that had been lost, gratitude for the relationship I had cherished with my grandfather, and even a hint of compassion for the broken woman my mother had become. The next day, I received a call from Benjamin. "Your mother has dropped all claims to contest the will," he informed me. "She's signed the legal acknowledgement of your ownership. It's over, Lindsay." Those words should have brought pure relief, but my feelings remained complicated. "Have you heard where they went?" I asked. "My sources say they've left the state," he replied. "Heading to Arizona, apparently. Frank has family there." I thanked him for everything he'd done, knowing I'd be paying his legal fees for months to come. Though financially strained, I had preserved what mattered most: my grandfather's final wish and the home where I had found stability and love. That night, I slept in my childhood bedroom for the first time since Grandpa's passing. The house was quieter than I remembered, emptier without his presence. But it was mine now, a place to build my future while honoring his memory. 6 months have passed since I reclaimed my grandfather's house. Spring has arrived, bringing new life to his garden where I've planted tomatoes and herbs just as he taught me. The house itself is slowly transforming, walls freshly painted, some rooms rearranged to suit my needs, yet with careful preservation of the elements that made it Grandpa's home. The financial aftermath of the legal battle was significant. I had to take a second job on weekends to cover the attorney fees, but Benjamin was patient and arranged a manageable payment plan. The emotional cost was harder to quantify. Trust doesn't rebuild as easily as bank accounts. In the months following the confrontation, I sought help through a support group for adult children estranged from parents. The stories I heard there helped me understand that my experience, while painful, wasn't unique. Many others had navigated similar betrayals and found ways to heal. Grief isn't just about death, my therapist explained during one session. You're grieving multiple losses: your grandfather, the relationship you wished you had with your mother, even the loss of a certain narrative about your family. This framework helped me process the complicated emotions that surfaced as I settled into the house. Some days brought unexpected waves of sadness, when I found one of Grandpa's handwritten notes tucked in a book, or heard the familiar creak of the third stair that he always promised to fix. Other days carried anger when I discovered another missing item or received an occasional text from my mother, always practical requests, never apologies. I established firm boundaries, engaging only through my attorney when necessary. The recovered items from Grandpa's collection now hold places of honor throughout the house. His books once again fill the shelves, though I've rearranged them by subject rather than his idiosyncratic system only he understood. The antique desk stands in what is now my home office, where I often work late into the evening. The neighbors have been incredible sources of support. Martha Henderson brings homemade bread every Sunday, continuing a tradition she had with Grandpa. Arthur helped me repair the back fence that had begun to sag, refusing any payment beyond a cold beer and conversation. Your grandfather would be proud, he told me as we admired our handiwork. Not just of the house, but of how you fought for what was right. Those words meant more than he could know. I've made new connections too. Diana Fairchild, my real estate attorney, has become a friend and mentor. Impressed by my determination during the legal battle, she suggested I consider law school. You have a natural instinct for justice, she observed over coffee one afternoon, and first-hand experience with how property law affects real people's lives. The idea took root. I've begun studying for the LSAT in the evenings, using Grandpa's desk as my command center. The marketing job that once seemed like my career path now feels like a stepping stone to something more aligned with my values. As for my mother, we remain estranged. 3 months after leaving Portland, she called from Arizona, asking if I would consider letting bygones be bygones. You're still my daughter, she said, her voice artificially bright. Family should stick together. The irony of those words after her betrayal wasn't lost on me. Family is who shows up, I replied, echoing Grandpa's wisdom. Who stays? Who puts in the work? The silence on the other end told me she recognized his words. I'm not closing the door forever, I continued, surprising myself with the offer. But I need genuine accountability, not just convenient forgiveness when you need something. She hasn't called since, but I've made peace with that possibility. Some relationships can't be rebuilt on the same foundation. Sometimes you need to start from scratch, with honest acknowledgement of past harm and clear boundaries for the future. The most important lesson I've learned through this ordeal is about the true nature of inheritance. While the house itself is valuable, the real legacy my grandfather left me was less tangible. Resilience, integrity, and the courage to stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult. He also taught me that family isn't defined by blood or legal documents, but by love, presence, and mutual respect. These values guide me as I build my life in the home where I found stability as a child and now create security as an adult. Today, as I sit on the porch swing Grandpa installed when I was 10, watching the neighborhood children ride bikes on the sidewalk, I feel a sense of contentment that seemed impossible 6 months ago. The house has begun to feel truly mine, though Grandpa's presence remains in the garden layout, the workshop organization, and the values that shaped both the home and the person I've become. If there's one thing I hope you take from my story, it's the importance of documenting your wishes clearly and standing firm against those who would disregard them. Protect what matters to you. But remember that healing often requires letting go of what doesn't serve you, including toxic relationships, even with family. Have you ever had to fight for something that was rightfully yours? Or had to establish boundaries with family members who couldn't respect them? Share your experiences in the comments below. Your story might help someone else facing a similar battle. And if you found value in my journey, please hit that subscribe button and like this video. It helps others find this community where we can support each other through life's difficult transitions. Thank you for listening, and remember, inheritance isn't just what's left to you, but what you choose to carry forward.